At my brother's wedding, the bride told me to leave in front of everyone after I spent over $40,000 making her dream day perfect. I said nothing, just walked out. And then I made 3 calls. In 9 minutes, the music stopped, the food vanished, and the tent came down. No one saw it coming. Not the bride, not my brother, but they should have known when you erase someone quietly, you forget who still holds the contracts. My name is Logan Myers. And this is how silence became the loudest thing I ever did. Logan picked up the coffee mug that had long gone cold. The bitter taste didn't bother him anymore. He stared out the window as traffic hummed below his Denver apartment, wondering when exactly he had signed himself up to be the man everyone depended on, but no one truly saw. He remembered Isla's laugh the first time she visited the Myers house for Thanksgiving. She was charming, effortlessly so. His mother adored her. Trevor, of course, was already smitten even back then. Logan stood in the kitchen that day carving the turkey while Isla complimented the cranberry sauce and laughed at all the wrong jokes. She hadn't noticed him watching. She never did. Their mother had pulled him aside once and said Isla reminded her of herself at 25. That should have been a warning. Instead, it felt like permission. He shook off the memory. His phone buzzed with a reminder about the catering deposit. Another $10,000 due by Friday. He had agreed to pay it last month without blinking. Not because they asked nicely. They never asked nicely. It was just assumed. Logan wasn't sure when silence had become his answer for everything. When exactly he stopped pushing back. Probably sometime around the 3rd time Trevor got bailed out of trouble by his big brother and never looked back to say thanks. He scrolled through the messages. A thread with Trevor mostly one-sided. Trevor asking for deadlines, asking if Logan had gotten it handled, no pleases or thank yous. One text stood out. Don't forget the lighting, guys. Isla really cares about the ambiance. Ambiance. That was funny. Logan had been putting out fires for the last 6 months while Trevor and Isla posted engagement selfies in Aspen. Meanwhile, he had been reviewing contracts, negotiating discounts, wiring payments, all while staying in the background. He had wanted to believe it made him a good man. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. It was Aunt Sylvia as expected. She always came without calling, always had a way of showing up when things started to unravel. She walked in carrying a brown paper bag, apple fritters and coffee from Tilly's down the street. Her way of softening the blow of whatever truth she planned to deliver. You got the invitation, she said, sitting at the counter before he even nodded. It came last week. And I'm going. A pause. Then Logan, you sure this is your hill to bleed on? He didn't answer right away. She pushed the fritter toward him. I'm not trying to change your mind, she said. But you've got to ask yourself, what's this going to cost you? That's not money. He looked at her, suddenly grateful for someone who still saw the cracks in his calm. Just want to get through it, he said finally. Make sure they have their moment, then I'll step back. That's what you always do, she said gently. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was familiar. That night, Logan walked down to the storage unit 2 blocks away. He unlocked it and stepped into the small concrete room. Inside, next to the old camping gear and his high school yearbook, sat the wooden box with his grandfather's cufflinks. He opened the lid, polished silver, clean lines, simple. He took them out, wiped them with the cloth inside. For a moment he imagined himself standing at that wedding, silent in the crowd. Invisible but ever present like always. He imagined Isla walking down the aisle, smiling at Trevor, brushing past him like he didn't exist. He imagined the music, the laughter, the polite nods. And then he imagined the quiet afterward, when the noise was gone, when the bills still existed, when family returned to routine and Logan was left behind again. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do yet. But he knew one thing. He was done being invisible. He slipped the cufflinks back into the box and locked the door behind him. He didn't need to pack much for the wedding. Just a suit, a pen, and maybe finally a voice. He walked back up to his apartment as the lights of Denver twinkled below. The invitation sat in the drawer. The air smelled faintly of rain. And for the first time in a long while, Logan Myers didn't feel small. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the bank called me. I still remember the way the sun cut through the blinds in my office, laying long shadows across my desk. The woman on the phone was polite, her voice smooth but firm, asking me to confirm a loan application I'd apparently signed off on 3 weeks earlier. I hadn't. At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe a mix-up with another client, but as she read off the company name, the EIN number, and finally the co-applicant's name, my stomach dropped. Trevor Myers, my little brother. My full legal name had been used as the guarantor, and not just that, but the primary signer. It wasn't a mix-up. It was intentional. I didn't react right away. I just thanked her and hung up. My hands stayed frozen on the keyboard for a while. I was angry, sure, but mostly I felt that old familiar ache blooming in my chest. Betrayal, but not surprise. I waited a few hours before calling Trevor. When he finally picked up, he sounded winded, like he'd been running or laughing. Probably both. I asked him straight out if he'd used my information to apply for a business loan. He paused for just a beat too long. Then he said something that still echoes in my head. "Come on, man. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork." He went on about how it was a small startup, how he needed a little push to get it going, how the bank wouldn't look twice at someone his age with no assets. He said it like it was logical, like forging my signature was some minor administrative shortcut. When I told him that was fraud, his tone changed. He got defensive, said I was being dramatic, said I always made things harder than they needed to be, that he was family and family helped each other. That word, family, it was always thrown at me like a leash. By the time I finished paying off the first installment a month later, the bank had stopped asking questions. I never pressed charges, never told anyone. Not because I forgave him, but because I couldn't stomach the thought of what it would do to my parents. A few weeks after that, we had dinner at my parents' place in Golden. The air smelled like rosemary chicken and disappointment. My mom was setting the table while my dad opened a bottle of wine. Trevor walked in late, laughing, Isla behind him in a navy dress. My mother beamed like royalty had arrived. I waited until we were seated, then brought it up. Calmly. No accusations. Just facts. That a loan had been taken out in my name. That Trevor had signed it. That I was paying for it. My father didn't look at me. My mother blinked, then said she was sure there had been some confusion. Trevor said he thought I had agreed to help. Isla said nothing, just stared at her plate. I looked at them all and realized I was alone in that room, even while surrounded by blood. Then my father finally spoke. "Trevor's young. He's figuring things out. You have a good job, Logan. You can handle it. Why make a scene over something that's already done, Like that made it okay. Like the damage wasn't real because I'd managed it." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. No one else moved. I wanted to scream, to break something, to demand they see me not as the fixer, the fallback, but as someone worth defending. Instead, I left. Quiet, always quiet. That night, I drove back to Denver with the windows down and the radio off. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles burned. When I got home, I pulled up the loan documents again. I looked at my signature, perfectly forged, clean and confident. Trevor had practiced. That hurt more than anything else. A few days later, I paid the full balance. I emailed the bank, closed the file, and deleted the folder. I didn't do it for Trevor. I did it because I was tired. tired of carrying weight no one else even acknowledged. For months after that, we didn't talk. Not really. My parents acted like nothing had happened. Trevor sent a birthday text. Isla posted engagement photos. I liked one out of habit. Regret followed seconds later. Back in the present, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and studied the face looking back at me. There were new lines at the corners of my eyes, gray at my temples. I didn't mind aging. What I minded was doing it alone. I pressed my palms against the counter and tried to imagine what would happen if I didn't show up to the wedding, if I didn't keep playing the part they'd written for me. But I already knew the answer. They'd move on. Trevor would find someone else to cover the bills. My mother would say I was being moody. My father would shrug. Isla might even feel relieved. I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. There was still something keeping me tethered. Not love, not duty. Maybe something colder, sharper. Maybe it was the need to finally stop being the background character in my own life. I opened the drawer, took out the invitation again, and held it in both hands. It was heavy. Not the paper, but the meaning. Aspen Ridge Garden, June 14th, noon. I would be there. Not for them. For me. The conference center in Boulder buzzed with the quiet hum of professionals pretending to be relaxed. Lanyards, name tags, business cards being shuffled like currency. I wasn't even sure why I agreed to attend the finance tech mixer that evening. Maybe because I needed the distraction. Maybe because I was tired of saying no. The ballroom smelled faintly of cologne, stale champagne, and ambition. I stood near the back by the faux marble buffet table nursing a soda I didn't want. I recognized a few faces from previous events. Clients, competitors, the kind of people who said things like, "Let's circle back," and never meant it. Then I saw him, Dylan Marks. He was across the room talking to a small group near the bar, laughing like he owned the place. His hair was shorter than I remembered, cleaner cut. The designer blazer, the polished shoes, even the watch. All intentional. Dylan always dressed like he was auditioning for a bigger life. My fingers tightened around the glass. I hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years. Not since that 4th of July barbecue at Trevor's old condo, back when Isla was just starting to show up at family events. Back when Dylan still called me his closest friend. He hadn't seen me yet. I could have left, could have blended out the back door and pretended I never came. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped into his line of sight. His gaze flicked toward me. Pause. Then he smiled, wide, open, like nothing had ever cracked between us. "Logan Myers, man, it's been forever." His voice was the same, smooth, practiced, just enough warmth to make it sound real. I nodded. "Dylan." He walked over, arms open like he expected me to match the gesture. I didn't. We settled for an awkward handshake pat on the shoulder hybrid. "You're still in Denver?" he asked, eyes scanning me, cataloging. "Yeah, still running Whitmore Consulting." "You..." He puffed up a little. "Just made partner at West Haven Equity. We're expanding into private capital. It's a grind, but you know how it is." I nodded again, because I did. We stood there for a few beats, sipping drinks and pretending this was fine. "You look good," he said finally. "Different. Like, settled. Thanks." He hesitated. "So, I heard Trevor's getting married. Heard from who? Facebook, maybe. Small world, huh?" I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on his. I waited. He shifted. "Anyway, how's the family?" "Fine." That was the end of the small talk. The air between us had changed. He felt it too. "You still talk to Isla?" he asked, casual but calculated. "Not really." He laughed, but it was dry. "Nah, not in a while. That whole thing was complicated." I tilted my head. "Yeah, complicated. We stood there for another moment, both holding truths we wouldn't say out loud. He looked down at his drink. Look, man, I know things got weird back then. But I always respected you. I mean that. I wondered if he meant before or after he started sleeping with Isla behind my back. If respect meant taking what wasn't his and pretending it didn't count because we'd never labeled it, because I'd never said the words out loud. I nodded again, a small, meaningless motion. Congratulations on the promotion, I said. I should get back to the office. He looked surprised, maybe disappointed, like he expected more. Yeah, sure. Good seeing you, Logan. You too, Dylan. I walked out into the cold night air. The wind off the mountains was sharp cleansing. I shoved my hands in my coat pockets and stared at the city lights scattered like broken promises across the valley. He thought I didn't know. Thought I never found out. Maybe Trevor didn't know either. Maybe Isla never told him that during those early days, when she and Trevor were still figuring things out, she and Dylan had slipped back into something physical, something quiet and reckless. I had known for years. I'd read the messages, I'd seen the photos she forgot to delete from the shared cloud album. I never said a word, not to Dylan, not to Trevor, not even to Isla. Why? Because I already knew how that conversation would go. Because I had learned a long time ago that silence wasn't weakness, sometimes it was strategy. I didn't need to expose them to feel strong. I didn't need to explode, but I never forgot. I walked to my car and sat there for a while, letting the engine warm. The wedding was 10 days away. And suddenly I felt a little more prepared. Invoices were stacked in a neat folder on my desk, catering from Wild Pine Kitchen tent rental from Summit Events sound and lighting from Echo Pro. The flower arrangements from maple and sage came with a custom arch made of hand-tied driftwood and eucalyptus. Every detail had been reviewed, approved, and prepaid. Total $42,562. All billed to Whitmore Consulting, all under my name. I double-checked the final vendor confirmations, cross-referenced delivery times, and scheduled a site check at Aspen Ridge Garden 2 days before the wedding. It was a quiet, routine, efficient clinical. Something I could control. Trevor hadn't messaged in over a week. Isla had sent a short email confirming the updated guest count, followed by a list of wine preferences and a vague note about table arrangements. Neither had said thank you, not once. I wasn't surprised. That weekend I drove out to Evergreen to meet Aunt Sylvia for lunch at the old diner. She liked the one with the peeling red booths and sassy waitresses. She was already there, stirring sweet tea with the straw like it had personally offended her. You look tired, she said before I even sat down. Just busy. She raised an eyebrow. Busy or burdened, I didn't answer right away. I reached for the menu even though I knew I'd just ordered the same thing I always did. They got you running this circus solo, she asked. More or less. She leaned in, eyes sharp. You know they don't see it right, everything you do, they're not built to. I know. Then why keep doing it? Because it's easier than explaining why I stopped. She sat back. That's not a good enough reason. The waitress came by. We ordered. Aunt Sylvia didn't let go of my gaze the whole time. After the woman left, she said something softer. Logan, I worry you think being quiet is the same as being strong. I folded the napkin in half. I'm not doing this to be strong. I'm doing it because it's what needs to get done. That's not the same thing either. We didn't talk about it again. The food came. We ate in peace. Before we left, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. Be careful. People like Isla. They take until there's nothing left and still call you selfish when you say no. The drive back into Denver was long and quiet. Traffic moved slow near Morrison, so I turned off and took the canyon route. It gave me time to think. I remembered Isla's first visit to the Whitmore house, the way my mother pulled her into the kitchen like a long-lost daughter, the way Trevor's shoulders squared up just being near her, the way my father said she had sharp eyes, businesswoman eyes. I remembered noticing her phone on the counter that night, the lock screen still showing messages from Dylan, and I remembered choosing silence. Back at my apartment, I reviewed the contract with Echo Pro again. Full cancellation refund available up to 72 hours before the event. After that, 50% retention. Every vendor had a similar clause. Everything routed through my accounts. My name. That night, Trevor finally called. "Hey man, just checking in. You still good on those rentals? Isla's a little stressed about the lighting. She wants it kind of romantic but not corny, you know." I stared at the phone. "I got it covered," I said. Cool. You're a lifesaver, seriously, that was it. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention the money. He didn't even ask if I was coming. I didn't bring it up either. The next morning, I drove out to Aspen Ridge for the walkthrough. The site manager, Claire, met me with a clipboard and a too bright smile. "We're excited to host the Whitmore wedding," she said. "It's going to be gorgeous." I walked the grounds with her, pointing out tent placement, electrical lines where the DJ would set up, how the guests would enter from the gravel lot. She nodded, made notes, complimented my organization. "You're not the groom, are you?" "No." "Brother, well, they're lucky to have you." I smiled tightly. That's what they say. The air up there was cleaner than I remembered. Pine-sharp sky, too blue to feel real. The silence was heavy but not unkind. It gave space to things I'd buried. On the drive back, I stopped at a gas station, bought a cold bottle of water, and sat in the car staring at the receipt. Every transaction tied to me, every agreement mine. It occurred to me for the first time that power didn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looked like paperwork, like patience. Sometimes it looked like letting them believe they'd won. Until they hadn't. The sun rose clean and sharp over Aspen Ridge Garden, painting the sky in streaks of lavender and gold. I arrived before most of the vendors, parking in the gravel lot beside a white rental truck filled with folding chairs and lighting rigs. The air smelled of damp pine and freshly cut grass, crisp with morning slunts. The tent was already half set, its white canvas fluttering slightly in the breeze. I walked the perimeter, checking placements, cords, generator setup. The sound technician from Echo Pro gave me a thumbs up and went back to testing the mic feed. The florist's assistant waved at me, arms full of eucalyptus garlands. It was beautiful. There was no denying that. Clean lines, rustic charm, elegance without trying too hard. It looked like a scene from a magazine spread. It looked perfect. I double-checked the run sheet, ticked boxes, made calls. The team moved around me with quiet efficiency. They knew who I was, knew who signed their checks. I didn't need to explain myself. Just after 9, the first guests began to trickle in. Mostly Isla's, side-high heels, designer sunglasses, lots of tight smiles and champagne tones. My parents arrived around 10, my mother in blush silk and pearls, my father in a stiff gray suit that looked borrowed. They nodded when they saw me, grateful but already distracted. Trevor appeared near the cocktail tent, laughing with a group of groomsmen I didn't recognize. He looked relaxed, tan, like someone who had never known stress a day in his life. He waved but didn't approach. I didn't go to him either. Isla arrived next, stepping out of a white town car in a robe and oversized sunglasses, flanked by 2 bridesmaids. She didn't look at me, walked right past with her phone pressed to her ear. Someone handed her a mimosa. That was the first real sign. The second came about 15 minutes later, when one of the catering assistants handed me a small envelope and said a woman in navy had asked him to give it to me. Inside was a printed copy of the seating chart. My name wasn't on it. Not at the family table, not at any table. I checked again. Nothing. I folded the paper slowly and slid it into my jacket pocket. I kept moving. Went through the checklist again. Power supply. Drink station. Aisle pedals. Microphone line check. Music cue sheet. Every task was precise, efficient, mechanical. At 11:30, as guests settled into their seats beneath the arbor, a woman with short blonde hair I didn't recognize approached me near the refreshment tent. She smiled kindly, glass of champagne in hand. "You're Trevor's brother, right?" "Yes." "Are you giving a toast today?" I blinked. No one had told me anything about a speech. I shook my head. She tilted hers. "Oh, that's surprising. I thought maybe you were best man." I gave a neutral smile. "Just helping out behind the scenes." She nodded slowly, then wandered back to her group. I stared out over the rows of white chairs, the flowered arch, the mountain peaks beyond, the picture-perfect silence that always came right before the ceremony. For a moment I felt the familiar pulse of resentment, but it was dulled quieter now, almost like muscle memory. Then a voice beside me, soft and accidental. I turned to see one of the venue assistants, a young guy with dark curls and a clipboard. He glanced up from his checklist and muttered, "I think the bride told them you wouldn't be staying long. Said she'd handle it if you tried anything weird." I looked at him. "What?" He blinked, realizing I'd heard. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean I think I misunderstood. She was just kind of intense earlier." I held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once and turned away. It didn't hit me all at once. It settled slowly like dust in a quiet room. I wasn't on the seating chart. I wasn't listed in the program. There was no speech planned, no introduction, no moment. I wasn't supposed to be seen. I was the man behind the curtain. And now I wasn't even supposed to be here. The thought curled around the base of my spine, cold and deliberate. I looked around again. Everything was perfect. The music had started, the guests were seated, the servers were lining up with trays, and I stood there in a suit I paid for at an event I funded, surrounded by strangers watching them celebrate without me. It didn't feel like an oversight. It felt like an extraction, a quiet erasure. A decision made long before I arrived. Something had shifted, I could feel it. The fault line beneath this polished day had begun to hum, and something inside me began to lean forward. Waiting. The music faded just enough for the officiant to step forward and cue the processional. Isla stood a few feet from me, adjusting her veil in the filtered light under the tent. Her back was to the guests, to the cameras, to the flowers that had cost nearly $7,000. She was surrounded by bridesmaids with glimmering eyes and tight smiles. I had moved to the far side of the tent near the edge of the staging crew. I wasn't in the way. I wasn't speaking. I had stayed invisible, just as they seemed to prefer. Until Isla turned. Her voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Logan, what are you doing?" I blinked. She was staring at me now, sharp jaw tight. A few heads turned. I said nothing. She took a step closer, her heels clicking on the wood platform. Her voice rose slightly, enough to carry, but not enough to seem unhinged. "Not yet. You're making this about you. It's not your day. You're not supposed to be here." The air pulled inward like the whole garden was holding its breath. Someone in the third row gasped softly. A guest fumbled their phone. The photographer paused, lens halfway lifted. I didn't move. Her face pinched tighter. "You need to go. Now." I glanced at Trevor. He was standing at the altar with the officiant hands clasped in front of him, eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't look at me. Didn't speak. My mother shifted in her seat but said nothing. My father looked off to the side as if watching birds. It hit me not all at once, but in a dull wave. They weren't shocked. Not truly. They had known, or at least suspected, and they had let it happen. No one moved to stop her. No one moved for me. I exhaled once, slow and steady, then gave Isla a nod. Not small, not ashamed, just acknowledgement. Then I turned. I didn't say a word, didn't make a scene. I walked the length of the aisle past flower petals and high heels, down between rows of family and friends who didn't really know me. A little girl whispered to her mother. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. The tent flap fluttered open as I stepped outside. Sunlight hit my face, the mountain wind brushed against my collar. I didn't stop walking until I reached the edge of the property, just past the vendor lot where the last of the equipment trucks were parked. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't angry. I was cold, still. A kind of quiet that came not from resignation but from clarity. They didn't want me there. Not really. Not even now. And now I was out of the way, just like they planned, which meant they had no reason to watch me anymore. No reason to care what I did next, which was their first mistake. The moment I closed the car door, the silence wrapped around me like armor. I sat for a second staring at the wheel, the faint echo of Isla's voice still lingering in my ears. Then I reached for my phone. First number, Echo Pro. The call rang twice before a technician picked up. "This is Ethan with Echo Pro. How can I help you?" "Hi, Ethan. This is Logan Myers. I'm listed as the contract holder for the Whitmore wedding at Aspen Ridge Garden today." "Yes, sir. We're already on site and the equipment is live." "I understand. I'm calling to cancel the service effective immediately. Please begin disassembly and exit the venue." A pause. "I'm sorry," what I repeated myself calmly. "Cancel all services, pack up and leave. Do not charge the remaining balance. I'm invoking the termination clause in Section 7. As of now, I'm no longer responsible for any fees associated with the Whitmore event." "Sir, are you sure?" "Yes." Another pause. Then a quiet sigh. "Understood. We'll begin breakdown now." I ended the call. Second number, Wild Pine Kitchen. The owner herself answered. Claire. She'd been pleasant throughout the planning. "Logan. What's going on?" "Hi, Claire. I'm calling to cancel the catering service for the Whitmore wedding today. Effective immediately. Do not deliver any additional trays, remove any food already at the venue. Shut it down." A stunned silence. But we're mid-prep. The reception starts in less than 2 hours. The contract is in my name. Not Trevor's. Not Isla's. Mine. You've been paid for half. You'll receive a termination invoice as agreed. Do not continue. Do not engage with guests. Walk away. Claire's voice was slower now. "Is everything okay?" "Not really. But this isn't on you. Just follow the contract." A moment passed. Then another. "Okay. We'll pull the staff. I'll confirm with my team. Thank you." I ended the call and took a breath. Third number, Summit Events. The voice on the other end was a young man I hadn't met before. He greeted me cheerfully until I gave my name and the event. "This is regarding tent and furniture rentals, correct? Correct. Cancel everything. Have your team begin teardown immediately, sir. We're mid-setup. Guests are present, I know. But the contract doesn't state anything about completion. I'm terminating per Clause 12. There's no need for further discussion." A long exhale. "Okay, understood. I'll notify the crew." I ended the call. 3 calls, less than 9 minutes. No yelling, no threats, just the law, just the facts. I placed the phone on the passenger seat and looked through the windshield. From the distance, the venue looked untouched, serene. It would only take a few minutes before the cracks started showing. The sound system would cut first. No music, no microphone. Then the food service would vanish. No trays, no drinks, no staff. Finally, the structure itself, the tent, the tables, the chairs, taken apart piece by piece. No speeches, no dancing, no celebration. It would fall quietly, then all at once. They wouldn't understand immediately. There would be confusion, frantic calls. Someone would blame a miscommunication. Someone else would look for me. But I wouldn't be there. I reached for my sunglasses, slid them on, and turned the key in the ignition. They thought I was gone. Just another obligation cleared off their list. They had forgotten who held the paperwork, and now they would remember. The silence hit first. The soft string quartet playing under the white tent abruptly went silent. One moment guests were seated, smiling, waiting. The next moment nothing more than taut air and empty anticipation filled the space. Heads turned. Waiters stopped mid-step with trays in hand. The band abandoned their instruments and awkwardly stood up as if trying to vanish into the flowers. I watched from the edge of the tent, hidden behind a structural pole, still in my suit, sunglasses reflecting the chaos inside. The lights dimmed. Speakers went dead. No music, no ceremony, just slow-motion panic. A few guests dropped their champagne flutes. One older couple paused, hands entwined, looking at the empty arch with confusion. Another table leaned in, speaking in low tones. Someone whispered expletives. A toddler began to cry. The kind of ceremony people rehearse for months collapsed in a breath. Isla appeared first, her alabaster face tight with fury. She marched through the rows, forehead creased, voice rising. "What is happening, Trevor? Tell me right now." Trevor stood at the altar, rigid. Confusion washed over his face like a spotlight. His hands shook, but he didn't move toward her. Instead, he looked at me. Not me, literally, I was outside. But he looked toward where I had been, as if sensing a ghost. Isla collapsed onto a chair. She pushed buttoned gloves up her forearms and cried out. "This was supposed to be perfect." Guests began gathering in clusters, some picking up phones. One older man, dressed in a gray tweed suit and wearing a faded tie, extended his hand to his wife. Then turned. He looked straight at the front, then finally stood and softly clapped. One clear clap that echoed before others noticed. Some looked around awkwardly and then joined him, small applause, gratified but unsure. Aunt Sylvia was quick to rise afterward. She didn't look at Isla or Trevor. She looked at me, or the space I occupied earlier, and nodded, not in pride but recognition. Then she walked out, dignified, silent in her departure. Back in the tent, Isla was weeping, frantic. Servers who'd already begun setting things back up looked around, confused. Trevor cleared his throat and tried to speak. He said something. I could feel the words catch in his throat, but I couldn't hear them. The guest list, my notes, the music cues, all irrelevant now. I walked slowly toward the edge where the tent met the lawn, stepping onto the grass. The fabric was damp with morning dew. My shoes creased the green beneath. I felt the distant glances, the buzzing cell phones, but I didn't stop. Outside the fence, a dark SUV idled, ready to go, and I felt a tingle of something like relief. The chaos inside was a release, a cleansing, a reckoning that was overdue. I stood there until I heard sirens in the distance, not for me, but part of the noise I left behind. I took off my sunglasses, rubbed my temples, and inhaled cool air. A faint breeze moved the pine needles above. The reception that wasn't happening faded behind me. It was done. And I was already moving forward. I was already moving forward, bound by certainty and a sense of distance, when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. The name flashing across the screen was Haley Grant. She wasn't someone I had expected to hear from today. I leaned against my car, the cold metal beneath my hand, grounding me. I answered. "Logan, it's Haley," she said, voice quiet. "I have something I think you need to see." Her tone was careful, like she was testing water. I waited. She sent an image, and when I opened it, I pressed my lips together against the instinct to speak too soon. It was Isla and Dylan. A photograph taken at a sunset party in Boulder 2 years ago. Dylan's hand rested on Isla's waist, and her head was tilted close to his shoulder. They were smiling, Cheshire soft, oblivious to the world. I'd seen that look before, long before Trevor even asked her to marry him. I hung up without words. I stared at that photo until my fingers pressed into the screen. Then I sent another image to Trevor. His name. Under the subject, "You need to see this now." That text didn't ping back properly. No reaction bubble. No one saying they saw it. Just the ghost of a message hanging in the air until his reply came, and nothing more. I waited, breathing in the chilly air, until another message popped up. "I'm on my way." He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say anything else. While he drove out into that garden, I remained bent over my phone, thinking about betrayal and forgiveness. About how easily you can be erased from the day after investing your life into it. Inside the ceremony, or what was left of a ceremony, continued in muted chaos. Chairs were everywhere. A drone of conversation whispered judgments, torn programs, unpaid vendors, flowers drooping in confusion. I walked toward the tent. Trevor wasn't there when I entered. His face appeared around a post, red eyes, drawn lips. The image blinked again, resurfaced in his hands. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me and then at that picture. Then he closed his eyes and exhaled long, as though expelling all the air from his life. Isla was on the ground near the florist's table. Her voice cracked between sobs as she called for Dylan. There was no defense or composure, only raw grief dressed in couture fabric. Her mother knelt beside her, apologizing into her hair like she was talking to a broken chut. I stood back but didn't leave. I watched as the truth untangled itself between them. Suddenly, a small voice beside me asked something no adult had said. A little girl in a pale yellow dress peered up at Isla. Wide eyes, tiny hands clasped together. "Did you make Uncle Logan sad?" The words hung there, innocent, piercing. Family and strangers froze as the girl's question echoed across the wreckage of a dream wedding. Isla looked up, tears trailing in silver lines. She stared at the child, at me, and then lowered her head. People shifted. Some bowed heads. Someone placed a hand on Isla's shoulder, trembling. I exhaled, felt something loosen. That moment, naive and brutal, cut deeper than any confrontation, because love always goes before guilt. The garden felt colder, smaller. Where only moments before stood an illusion of perfection, now was the weight of something real. I turned away and stepped through the tent flap into the late afternoon sun. I stood there listening to dripping condensation from the flower arch and the distant hum of a generator. 10 days to a dream, 11 minutes to betrayal, and in between was everything that mattered. I crossed the threshold of my apartment, the door closing behind me with a muted click that felt final. I carried with me the weight of the day and the ache of slants. The reception that collapsed, the questions that were never asked, and the flicker of that child's voice asking softly if I had been made sad. It all hung in the air. I went straight to my desk and opened the top drawer, retrieving a brown envelope that I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters from my parents, yellowed with age, each word a wound I had carried quietly. The envelope was marked with dates. One from back when I was 17, another from 18 dates when everything shifted. I sank into the chair and read the first one. Handwritten, neat penmanship, my mother's looping script. You are so bright and capable, so much so, that we hope you will let your brother take that full scholarship to Stanford instead. We want him to have every opportunity we could not give ourselves. You understand? I swallowed, keeping the letter in my hand. Fingertip tracing the paper. I closed my eyes, trying to remember exactly how that moment had felt. A drive home alone and the letter untouched on my bed, the way my father said at dinner that sacrifice was noble, that real strength was chance. My breath stuttered, but there was no anger anymore, just a hollowness that had taken years to settle around my chest. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline glowing under the evening sky. The city seemed distant, innocuous. Today it had hosted a wedding, a dramatic failure, a betrayal. Tonight it held nothing for me but a quiet relief. I placed the letter on the coffee table and lit a fire in the hearth. The flames flickered to life and cast dancing shadows. I watched as the paper curled, ink blackening edges, words dissolving into smoke. The scholarship, the expectations, the silent burdens, they all drifted away in white tendrils. When I stood up again, I felt lighter. I pulled a fresh sheet of stationery from the stack on my desk and a pen from the cup beside it. I paused, holding the pen in my hand, listening to the crackle of the fire. Then I wrote, "From this day forward, I choose to live for myself. No signature, no flourish, just the words, honest and small." I folded the note and placed it into an envelope. I didn't address it to anyone. It wasn't meant to be mailed. It was meant to exist outside the expectations that came with my name, my duty, my old life. I leaned back in the chair, watched the flames curl, felt the knot in my chest release just a breath at a time. It wasn't a triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was something quieter, a turning. Tomorrow I would wake up without that weight on my shoulders. And for the first time in a long while, that felt enough. I sat in the quiet corner of Maple and Bean, the small cafe tucked behind the bookstore I used to visit during college. The hum of the espresso machine and the faint scent of roasted beans and old paper felt comforting, as though time slowed just for this moment. Haley arrived a few minutes later, not rushed, her expression soft. We ordered black coffee the way we used to. No pastries necessary. We didn't speak at first, we just looked at each other. She reached for her cup, fingers trembling slightly. I did the same. I thought about all the words I'd rehearsed, apologies, explanations, defenses, but none felt necessary in this space. She stared at me for a beat, then said softly, "You did what you had to do." I paused. The honesty in her tone carried no judgment, just acknowledgement. I closed my eyes and let the weight of those words settle. "Thank you," I said finally, though my voice felt quieter than I intended. She nodded and took a sip of her coffee. Outside the window, a light drizzle began turning the street into diagonal ribbons of shining gray. I watched droplets race each other down the glass. "You okay?" asked Haley. After a long silence, I looked back at her and nodded. "I think so." She set her cup down. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "And I mean that more than you know." I swallowed. That was enough to fill everything inside me that had felt empty these past weeks. Later, when I returned home, I checked my email. The message from Dylan was waiting. He apologized, said he was ashamed of what he'd done, admitted his part in everything that fell apart. His words were courteous, measured, maybe even expected. I stared at the screen for a long time, then closed the laptop. No reply necessary. Silence could speak louder than any response. Shortly after, I opened a text from Aunt Sylvia. Her messages were usually brief and pointed. Tonight she wrote, "You deserve to live for yourself, and believe me, I've always known you would." Tears pooled at the back of my eyes. I didn't type back. I didn't need to. That evening, I pulled out the handwritten note I'd placed on my desk the other day. I read again the words I'd written from that moment of clarity. From this day forward, I choose to live for myself. I traced the lines with a fingertip, feeling something shift within. I called my mother, only to tell her I wasn't coming home this weekend. She asked why. I said I needed time, just that, nothing more. She didn't ask for reasons, she didn't press, we didn't speak again until she said, "Take care of yourself and I love you." Even that felt different tonight. I sat back in my chair and listened to the rain against the window. Outside, the streetlights blurred reflections shimmering in puddles. I didn't cry. I just exhaled until the breath felt full enough to hold the promise of tomorrow. And in that quiet, I felt something new, something real, a beginning. And I was ready. I arrived at the beach wedding just as the late afternoon sun began to soften. Everything felt different this time. Sand beneath my shoes, sea salt in the air, casual linen dresses and sandals instead of crisp suits and high heels. It wasn't Aspen Ridge Garden. It was a private ceremony for a high school friend of mine held at Golden Sands Beach just south of Denver on the reservoir. I stood near the edge of the crowd off to one side with a drink in my hand. I wasn't the officiant, not the planner, not the brother. I was just a guest. That was exactly how it was supposed to be. The bride's laughter spilled into the air as she and her new husband exchanged vows, reciting promises that sounded old and pinned together with hope. Their families leaned forward, eyes bright, pressing into every word. I watched them. No pain rose in my chest, no longing, only something close to peace. A barefoot toddler chased a seagull offshore, squealing with delight. Children ran in circles, the breeze played with hair and thoughts. I let it settle around me. I thought back to Isla's wedding in the garden. The pain, the betrayal, the erasure. I thought about the day the ceremony collapsed in quiet, rolling chaos. The little girl who asked if Isla made me sad. The letters I burned. The note I wrote saying I would choose myself from then on. Today I was here freely. The bride looked like she was glowing, the sun behind her hair halo bright. She reached for her husband's hand and squeezed it. Everyone clapped softly. I clapped too, not for me, but for love. Later, people drifted to the dunes for photos. I edged closer to the water. The reservoir was calm. A few kayakers glided by. The water reflected the sky, pale gold and soft blue. I pressed my toes into the wet sand. It felt real underfoot, grounding, finite, right. I opened my phone to clear notifications. One was an email from Dylan. He had sent one more apology, admitting his guilt, hoping I would one day forgive. I didn't delete it. It sat unopened. Silence had finished its work. I looked ahead and saw Aunt Sylvia's message pop up. "You kept your strength without raising your voice." I smiled and read it again. It was enough. I let the breeze wrap around me. I was present, unguarded, free of expectations I never asked for. Free of the need to perform, to explain, to prove. I was just me. For once it felt simple, to stand among people celebrating love without fear. Revenge isn't always about fury and spectacle. Sometimes it's about quiet, about knowing you don't have to speak for justice when you already walked out of the chaos. Sometimes silence and walking away at exactly the right moment is punishment enough. If you've ever stood at a crossroads between giving everything you have and choosing yourself for once, I hope you choose you. Thank you for staying with me.